I'm a member of Greenwich and Woolwich Labour Party, member of Greenwich Momentum, been a member of the Labour Party for a long time, since the early 1970s. I think probably the thing that's my claim to have any role in presenting a skill relates to my past work. I had a long career working in community law centres, firstly, and then latterly in migrants' rights supporting organisations of one sort or another, which involved a lot of campaigning work and trying to get our ideas out there into the public to mobilise support around it and see if we could have an impact on the policy agenda of one sort or another. And what I want to talk about today is a particular approach to campaigning, which many of you will have heard about. It's been around for a long time, but it's worth bearing in mind again, because being able to refresh ourselves that there ought to be a plan, there ought to be a methodology when we go into campaigning. We don't just stumble into it naively and assume that everybody's going to change their opinions because of what we're was the sheer force of our argument. And that methodology is called participatory action research, which is an awful long name for something which I hope will sound an awful lot simpler as I go along. The context in which I've learned about this, I'm going to go into a bit more detail towards the second half of my talk, but the context in which I learned about this work was finding myself in a situation where in order for the campaign that you're working on to be effective, you really had to get out of your comfort zone. It wasn't simply a matter of, as it often is nowadays, opening up a Facebook page and starting a petition and having people coming along to sign it. It actually meant getting out there into the local community that you're working in and dealing with the people who are affected by the issue that you're concerned with. And I started to learn this from my work in law centres back in the 1970s, where in order to take up a particular issue, in those days a lot of it was to do with housing issues. You know, you were in a position where you might be able to influence what the council, the local authority, was saying on housing issues, but you were just another voice, basically, another interest group that was lobbying them. So the methodology that we learned to use at that time was to go out. It was absolutely of critical importance at the earliest stage of our work that we were in contact with, in the closest possible contact with the people who are affected by the issue that concerned us. In the case of housing issues, it would have been tenants associations and residents associations, sitting down with them. But in dealing with that, you quickly found yourself that you were often seen as an outsider with this group, and you were reading your agenda onto them, and that was not very good in terms of building networks, building solidarity, building trust. So the beginning of the whole process was actually sitting down and working out what were the issues that concerned with those people at any one point in time, and then what value you could add to a process which was already underway. So that was the basic idea. I later went on to work for migrants' rights organisations a long period with the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants as their public education officer. And the thing about migrants' rights, particularly in the 1970s and the 1980s, was that you could certainly not assume that you had public opinion on your side. On completely the contrary, you were in a very isolated position, and you were trying to persuade people to take views which went to everything that they were led to believe from what they were reading in the media and so on. But again, it was essential to know that you were really working with issues that motivated and concerned the migrant communities. And during the course of the 1980s, that was usually to do with family reunification issues. It was communities like the Bangladeshis and the Pakistanis who were having huge difficulty in being able to bring their families over from those countries. So we again, the very beginning of the process was sitting down, talking to people directly affected with the whole issue, finding out how they were already working on it, the things they were doing, and how you could add value to the processes that were underway. So that was a process that was established at that point. And I think now I'm getting to the point where I actually want to start talking about the details of participatory action research, exactly what it looks like. And Rosie suggested that this might be a good point to have the chat box on in case you've got any points of clarification that you might like to come at me. Just very briefly, very quick points where I haven't been clear and you think you'd like some clarification. So,
yeah, so I've opened the chat box. So if you have got any questions, as Don said about that, we're kind of clarifying what he's just said, but a lot of this is obviously going to be going into detail, and we'll have more of a Q&A at the end, but the chat box is open if you have anything just immediately, especially with Don's experience, as he's just said, and then we'll move on to the bulk.
Yeah, one question there about whether I worked with the Irish, and I did, in fact. I worked with in the Finsbury Park area, a group of men, Irish men, who basically were having a very hard experience of life, and they had no networks to support them. And I spent quite a long time working with various Irish community organisations, and as well as the Catholic Church, to find out how we might be able to reunite people in that situation. So that was perhaps another example of the work that we were involved in at that time. But there are no other queries have come up, so I think probably we can move on to the PowerPoint slide that I've prepared for this. So Rosie, if you're ready to do that. Okay, this is a really simple slide. Hopefully, no singing or dancing, moving graphics or anything, just simply a list of the issues that are there. As you can see, we called it participation action research. That is a priority, I think, that we put them in. Action becomes research because we really want to make it clear that this isn't an academic exercise when we talk about research. Research is a big part of what needs to be done, but it is not research in and of itself. It is research for a particular purpose, and that purpose is building resistance. How do you actually work with groups out in the community which are fighting their corner? What needs to be done in order to strengthen that? So on to the next section. And there are, it's useful to think of this strategy as having 4 distinct stages where you're working your way through a pretty logical process. But each stage has its own checklist so that you know you've accomplished something. And when you've reached the objectives of that stage, you're ready to move on to the next stage. And not only that, it continues to spiral upwards. Once you have got to the final part of these 4 stages, you're basically at the point where you can start re-evaluating again everything that you've learned, the allies that you've made during the course of your campaigning work, how your arguments have been improved by the data that you've got. So it brings you back to a point where you could say, once again, how do we continue with this campaign? But are essentially these four periods. The first one is securing participation, getting out there into the community and getting the process underway. Second one, strengthening the message. You've started the whole process having a good idea of the message that you wanted to get across, but how is it improved after your period of discussions and consultation with the communities? Thirdly, getting the message across. This is basically a communication strategy. Who needs to know the stuff that you have found out during the course of your campaigning work up to date, and how do you get it there? That could include everything from getting it into the media. It could mean setting up the blog spots and so on, and it can mean a much more overt and direct political campaigning, organising lobbies, organising demonstrations, for doing what you can to lean on people. And then finally, as I say, you get to the stage, having gone through all of these process, this is a learning experience from start to finish. What exactly have you learned? What use are you going to make with it in the future? How are you going to continue to work with the allies and the collaborators that you've built up today? So looking at each of those stages in a little more detail, Rosie, if you could go on to the next slide. Securing the participation stage. What is the issue you want to work on? Well, you know that, but it could be so many different things. It could be the issue of affordable housing in your local community. It could be the issue of the labour market, what is happening there. Something highly relevant, I think, at present, where we're expecting there to be a huge hike in unemployment in the course of the next few months or so. But what do you know about your local community which is most at risk for this? Where is it going to be concentrated? Which groups are going to experience it most severely? What is being done at the moment? Who are the local community leaders who are alert to these issues and campaigning on them? And there's the other things that we're all familiar with, the issue of privatisation of NHS services, migrants in the local community, trying to consolidate arguments about new Green New Deal issues on your local community. They're all there. So the next issue is, who do you expect? You've got your issue, but who do you think it's going to be important for you to work with to develop this campaign? And you know, that's probably quite extensive. I think it's absolutely essential that one of the things that you do is start compiling names that go considerably beyond the usual suspects in your local Labour Party branches. The whole purpose of this, I think this falls very much under the category of building the social movement, which is one of Momentum's aims. It's about moving from your comfort zones in local Labour parties and CLPs and ward branches and getting out into the community. So who do you want to work with? Then the next issue is what is already known about the issue and how that you want to work on. I think probably here you might want to sketch in something like a focus group being organised. Those of you, anybody who has experience of organising a focus group, that basically means sitting down with anything from half a dozen to 10, 15 people or so, not too large, but people who are knowledgeable, who are there, they're working on the issues, and you facilitate a discussion with that group. You're not leading it. It's not going to be led off by a speaker who considers themselves to be the authority on the issue, but it is all about what is already in your heads about this issue, and how do we get it out into the open? How do we make that the basis of the campaign that we're working on? Then who, not only that, but also who outside this room, this 10 people or so who are sitting in this focus group, is working on the issue. Are we confident we know who they are and how we can get in touch with them? And then probably what all this accumulates in is that we know, having gone through this process, we've learnt an awful lot about what we already know. But where are there gaps in our knowledge? And anticipating the flack that's going to come against us, people who are going to be arguing a contrary position. What do we need to know that's going to improve the case that we want to make? All of this has to be recorded. All of this is a checklist, if you like, where you need ticks against each of these boxes in order to be confident that you can go on and deal with the last point, which is how are you going to work together with other concerned groups. Moving on to the next slide then. Strengthening the message. This is probably thought of as the research stage. You hopefully by this time you've got a solid group of people who are committed to supporting each other and sharing all the information that they've got. But where do you need to delve a little bit deeper into this? Where do you go in order to get the data? Where do you need to go in order to find out what is already being argued about this, what is already exists within the policies that are being rolled out by the various public authorities? Now, this looks a bit more like a traditional research element of it. It means doing what academics would call a literature review, for example. It means going around all the websites and so on and so forth in order to see how the issue has been framed up to now. And in doing that, getting a better sense of where you've got to sharpen up your own ideas, where you need additional evidence, where you need additional information. How are you going to get this across? Well, there's a whole range of ways you can do that. Obviously, blogs, videos, local newspapers, radio stations, things of this nature. How do you, the things that you've found out, how do you configure them so that they can be put across in this format? Important, who is going to be the spokespeople in your campaign? Anybody who's run a campaign, they're trying to get their message into the press, knows the first thing that they're going to be answered is, can you fit me up with somebody who is dealing with this directly? In my case, in migrants' rights organisations, it was invariably somebody who's about to be deported or has experienced whatever it is. But are you in a position to do that? Have you got people within your group who are geared up in order to play this role? Do they have the skills that they need to do that? Because you don't want to push people into a position where they're going to be shot down in flames, where they appear in front of a council meeting or whatever, and they haven't been properly prepared, and they basically have a really bad experience. These are all part of the strengthening of the message aspect of it. So going on to the next slide. The communication strategy. Do you have a communication strategy? The starting point for a communication strategy is having an idea who needs to hear this message. We found out all this really interesting, important stuff about what's going on in our local community, but on whose agenda do these issues appear? Who is it that we need to influence in order to change their policies? And there you've got a list of, depending on the campaign that you're working on, it might be a local authority. For a lot of us in Momentum, I think it probably would be local authorities that we're trying to influence. If you're working on Green New Deal issues, it could be energy companies. It could be government departments. My common experience on immigration was that you were obviously trying to lean on the Home Office. MPs, all of these would be people who you would be crafting a message, trying to a specific message which is relevant to the work that they're doing in whatever organisations they're working in. Who are your allies with regard to this message? Are there other organisations which don't necessarily take your issue as a central agenda item, but they would nevertheless still be interested in it? An example of that for us, I think, in the days, in my immigration campaigning days, was dealing with the position of children in families where parents were separated because one parent couldn't get a visa to come here, and discovering that we had a door open to the Children's Commissioner, who didn't normally think about immigration issues from one day to the next, but because you had framed an issue in a way that was relevant to her work, suddenly you had an ally on board who was prepared to assist you with all of this. How do you measure the strength of your campaign? Have you got a sense of what shows that you are making progress in the work you're doing? And that could be everything from the number of people turning up at your lobby, at the council meetings, who are there to help you lobby them, which is an obvious way of dealing with it. The numbers of people signing your petition, the number of people liking your video messages, the number of resolutions that are being passed by party branches, trade unions, adopting your resolutions. These are all potentially ways of dealing with it. Do you have an agreement as to what constitutes success? How do you know that you're making progress with this? Is it just, it has to be more than a good feeling. It has to be some sort of tangible sense that you're going forward. I think the most important way of doing that is going right, the group that you started working with at the beginning, the people who are involved in your focus group, the first group of community activists that you sat down with. Do they regard it as being progress? Do they think that it has been worthwhile getting to this point? And their voices are becoming louder and more influential. Finally, onto the last slide, the reset, building on what you've achieved. Obvious things here: celebrate what you've achieved in an appropriate way. Get it at the very minimum, it would be, I think it would be a blog of some sort, actually putting down a permanent record of the learning process that you've been through and where it's come to. More elaborate ways of doing it would be a video or maybe a conference, publishing a report, something of that sort. Getting part of that would be having a better sense of how different the situation is after you've completed the previous stage. You may not have won your campaign, and you'll be very, very lucky if you have actually won your campaign and the whole thing's done and dusted. It's more likely that you have moved things up a notch. You have strengthened the network that you're working with, that you've learned a lot of things about each other during the course of it, and you need a mechanism that allows you to evaluate the place that you've actually come to. What agreement is there about the new tasks and issues that are confronted? Now, this is there a consensus? Is the group still holding together? Are people confident that it's been a worthwhile exercise and they're ready for the next stage of it? And then that's exactly where we go back to the first stage of the action research, the framing of new questions, considering once again who the allies are, who are the people who are knowledgeable, and so on, going back to the focus groups, and beginning once again to formulate a new plan, which the purpose of that plan at every single stage is to build a community, to build a network, to reach a consensus about the experiences that you've been going through. And I think that's probably it. I was told to speak for about 20 minutes or so and leave a bit of time for questions at that point. So I'll hand it back to Rosie. Oh yeah, sorry, there's my final slide. Is you're welcome to get in touch with me at my Twitter handle there.
Wanted to make sure that you had that in so people can get in touch. I think I speak on behalf of everyone where I say thank you so much. That was really, really informative. And as you say, you linked it back to your experience in migrant rights organising, but this is very, very applicable to all campaigning, really. So thank you so much. I've opened up the chat box, so if anyone does have a question on what Don has spoken about, you can pop it in the chat box. If you feel like you'd like to say it out loud as well, then you can let me know. Just do that in the chat box, and you can unmute yourself as well. That's a nice way of asking. In terms of a copy of the slides, so we have recorded this, and all recordings of all the skill shares that we do when the person sharing the skill is happy to be recorded will be available on the Slack and the Momentum Volunteers Slack. I'm actually going to post the link of how you can join that if you haven't. And this is a way also for you to share skills and continue the conversations that are started by here and these skills. So I'll talk to Don, but maybe we can pop the presentation up on there as well. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, I mean, it was incredibly comprehensive. But does anyone have any questions? Do pop them in the chat.
Okay, you're welcome. I can imagine people want to get away and have their lunch now, but I'm as I say, I'm very happy to respond if you you think of anything during the course of the day. Oh, some question there from Lucy. Do you have any specific strategies for ensuring the voices of people from
oppressed and vulnerable groups that you might be working with are included?
Yes, I do. Probably it's a big subject to open up in the last couple of minutes of this. My view is that this is a methodology which is particularly adapted to working with people whose voices are not normally heard, and it answers the need. I've always been concerned about some migration campaigns that I've been involved in, which have been formulated very much by at a higher level by, for example, lawyers who are working on particular issues, and they start rolling out a very high level demand. And nowadays there's Facebook pages and petition campaigns will be underway, and it's the experience of people actually down below in the grassroots is not particularly obvious. And whereas this starts from that, I mean, a lot of the work that I've done for many years, I was on the board of a platform for international cooperation on undocumented migrants, which was based in Brussels. And that was really getting down to people who lived their entire lives in the shadows, whose whole method of existence was not coming to the attention of the authorities. But there you were. That was exactly what you wanted to do. You wanted to grab hold of their experiences and to give them confidence, to strengthen their voices and so on. And I think that this methodology of participatory action research was pretty well adapted to that.
Thank you, Don. We have a couple of other questions as well. If people are happy to stay on for another 5 minutes, then maybe we could answer those.
I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Brilliant. So we have another one, which is, and make sure I don't know. So how do you know if a celebration is appropriate? And I'll tell you the other one as well, is any specifics on how you countered anti-migrant bias at an emotional level outside of stats and facts? Speaking from Brexit land, says Scott. But yeah, how do you start with knowing if a celebration is appropriate?
Basically, the people who you work through the whole process with, they will tell you if they valued the experience that they've gone through. They will want to mark it in some shape or form, and that might simply be as simple as a blog. Somebody writing 1,000 words or so, setting out exactly what happened and what you learned from the whole process. It could be a conference, it could be a report. It was for the sort of work I was doing. It was very common that the whole process would end up as a conference or a report coming from it. And it would usually be appropriate as well to make it a bit more sociable, to celebrate it over a glass of wine or whatever was there. But basically, it's go back to the people that you're working with and saying, we've been through a bit of a ride here together. How do we mark what we've learned up to now? On anti-migrant bias, again, that's really important to listen. The research side of the whole thing was basically testing your argument, finding out how it runs up to now, and where it falls down, the gaps in it, where it's not going to be persuasive. There are going to be some people who are going to dig their heels in and resist parts of it. Now that works in the field of migration, that works with people who I describe as skeptics. I mean, not the out and out hostile people, or whatever it is, the 10-15% of the population who in no circumstances want to have migrants living down their street. But for the more common experience of people who think, well, it must be obvious that there are too many migrants in the country, because we read it in the local newspapers, and that they're all claiming social security benefits and all of that stuff. where it is going to be possible to pick away at that, and in the first instance to undermine their own confidence that that is true, that the things that they're asserting really are the situation. And beyond that, the more you can do that, the more you can erode people's confidence in anti-immigrant positions, then the more a situation will come along. It's always reality which actually clinches these arguments in the long and short of it. And we're in the middle of that at the moment. The idea that low-skilled migrants aren't worth anything and that we could easily dispense with them. You know, we are now in the point in the learning curve where people have to confront that. And hopefully the work you've been doing up to now has put them in a good position where they're prepared to really question their prejudices in the matter and start moving in the direction you want them to go in. Yeah, John Latham's point there, that's true. The lump of labour fallacy is the one that says there are only so many jobs available in the labour market at any one point in time. It's like an egg box, if you like, and you can only fit so many eggs in the box. And if any foreign eggs come in and start taking those slots, and they can only be doing it at the expense of the native eggs that would otherwise be there. And it is a fallacy. Economists, any reputable economist will tell you that there are no fixed number of jobs in an economy. That goes up and down as economies expand and recede. And migrants generally contribute to economic growth, and therefore they actually increase the number of jobs in the economy.
Thank you so much, Don. And we're coming up to nearly 5 past. And this is, yes, lunchtime Skillshare. I'm sure a lot of us has lunch to do. But once again, from all of us, I just want to say a massive thank you. Thank you for sharing this skill. It's very helpful. For anyone who wants to continue talking to Don, as you say, there's his Twitter account, and I popped it on the chat box. But you can also join our Slack at volunteer.peoplesmoventum.com. And we have a channel in there that is to discuss skill shares around organising, and we can continue conversations going there as well. And for anyone else who through this has an experience, I mean, Don's experience is very extensive, which is brilliant, but any other part of this or an element of this where you have had experience of this that you'd like to share a skill on, again, please check out the Slack and get involved. We'd love you to share as well. So once again, thank you so much, Don. And I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their Monday. And we'll put this recording on for everyone.
Yeah, thank you everybody for participating. It's been a pleasure talking to you all.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.